I hear people in counseling say the same thing. You know, I swore I'd never do this, or I can't believe I'm doing this, or maybe they didn't even think about it.
It's really hard to have a different outcome if we're not recognizing that blueprint and changing those little behaviors. Relationships, I like to think of them as this dance we're doing. And even if it's a really unhealthy dance, it's still the dance that we're used to doing together. And so now all of a sudden someone starts getting healthier and they change the dance steps and you're like, whoa, I like that dance we were doing. I was used to that dance.
Well, Kristen, welcome to Awesome Marriage Podcast. Thank you so much for being here today. I am excited about this conversation and we'll just jump into it.
Me too. Thanks for having me.
You're welcome. So let's talk about what sparked your desire to research and work with generational healing.
Yeah.
And maybe explain a little bit of what that really is.
Absolutely. It really stemmed from my own healing journey. I embarked upon, really started about 6 years ago. I had a chaotic and dysfunctional childhood growing up, and I was seeing all the ramifications of that play out in my mothering and my marriage and in my own spiritual life in ways that just really started to scare me. And I saw all these things that I had always said, I would never want to do that with my children, or I want my family to be different. Yeah. And then here I was doing those same things and watching my family become all the things that I had said I never wanted them to become. And I was scared and I knew I had to do something about it. And so I got myself into therapy. I got some really good spiritual mentors and started to really do the work that was needed, but also found that I was learning all these things about trauma and the brain and pain and all these things that I had been through and trying to reconcile them with what the Bible had to say about all of it. And there wasn't a lot of resources out there. So after I did a lot of my own research and got a lot of great mentoring, that what led me to write the book Legacy Changer that just came out, because I wanted other people to have these resources that I had so desperately needed.
Absolutely. Absolutely. You know, I think that's such a common thing that we think that we're not going to repeat the patterns that we didn't like growing up. Yep. And yet it's so often that I hear people in counseling say the same thing. You know, I swore I'd never do this, or I can't believe I'm doing this, or maybe they didn't even think about it, but they find themselves repeating things and think, this isn't good. This isn't good for me. This isn't good for our family. So that's kind of what you went through. Did that happen early? I know you have 4 kids. When did you kind of come to that realization?
It was just after our 4th was born, and the always unhealthy relationship I had with my mom was magnified by her moving into our home. She had nowhere else to go. And so she moved in, and then all the unhealthy roots were just boiling up to the surface. And it was really hurting my marriage and my ability to be a mom. And I had to ask her to leave, even though she had nowhere to go. And it was by far the most painful choice I've ever made, but also the most right choice, because I had to protect my kids from a path that we were headed down.
Yeah, that had to be a hard decision.
Yeah, it was really hard.
But I think you had the support of your husband, which you would have had to do that. And then just sometimes I think we have to make those tough decisions, but knowing that our first priority is our family and our husband and what it's doing to them. And so I admire you for being able to do that, because it sounds like in the big picture, it made a difference for you.
Yeah. Yeah. And I've reconnected with her since. And by the grace of God, we're figuring out a relationship with a lot of wisdom and boundaries that go into it. But, because just banning someone from our life or, putting these big walls up, that's not what we want in these difficult relationships. And when we know that's not the legacy we want to be carrying on, but starting to lead our marriage and our parenthood and our life with some better wisdom and personal boundaries for ourselves is what we have to do.
Absolutely. I think so. And I think trusting God with the restoration, if that's to come, and I know God wants that. And so if there's possibility, I think we trust him that in his timing, that can become something can come around again. It sounds like that's kind of where you guys are now with your mom. So that's encouraging. So let's talk about childhood wounds and how they might be holding our listeners' marriage back right now. How do those affect a marriage relationship? How do they affect yours?
Yeah, this is something my husband and I wish we figured out so much sooner in our marriage.
Sure.
But when we finally started to both understand how trauma affects the body and affects the brain and affects our reactions, we started to understand each other a lot better, because we were in this cycle of I would have these big reactions that were really based more on the pain that I had experienced years ago than they were whatever was happening in that situation. And then he would get offended and he would have a really defensive reaction, and it would only magnify the betrayal that I had already felt long ago. And we were just going round and around with this. And when we started to learn about the trauma, and then we started to learn about attachment, and that he had all these avoidant tendencies and I had all these really anxious tendencies, and how those could really rub up against each other. We started to speak each other's language a little bit better. And when he was avoidant, I could see it as more as something that this is something that he has been wired to react in this way, and less so than a reaction against me. And I could take it less personally, and vice versa. And we could start to have some language around that and communicate about our needs a little bit better, learn to speak up. Hey, I'm feeling really anxious and I think I'm just needing a conversation right now. And then he could say, oh, okay, I don't have to be afraid of all these things she's asking of me. I can sit down and have a conversation. And he could be less avoidant, and we could kind of break that and disrupt that cycle.
Yeah. So when you started your kind of journey to figure all that out, was he on board to start with? Did he understand what you were getting ready to do? And you may not have known where it was going to take it either.
No, I didn't understand at first, and he didn't understand. I would say it's been almost a leapfrog journey where he gets a little ahead and then I get a little ahead. And we've both had a lot of our own personal work to do that's had to come together as two healthier people into a marriage. But I wouldn't say that we've necessarily been at the same point at any point in time.
I think that's true for most couples. I think we do. And I think, God grows us in certain ways, and it's just learning to be probably patient with ourselves and patient with the other person too.
Yeah.
And knowing that you're both on that journey. So was there a time that you both said, okay, we are on this journey together and we're going to do whatever it takes to get there?
Yes. Yeah. We've both been committed. We like to joke that we're a death, not divorce family, because we are just in it to win it.
I love it.
And so we're really committed to this, working even on the really hard days. And so we're both readily admit that some days have been really hard, but, we are committed to learning more. I think one of the things that really turned the corner was when he read The Body Keeps the Score, a book all about trauma, and started to understand oh my gosh, all these ways my wife's been reacting are not personal attacks on me. And so we've just been committed to learning.
I love that book, and I'm glad you brought it up, because I recommend it, because I think it's written so well, and it helps us understand things that I think we just don't usually talk about, or nobody talks about to us, and just to be that awareness. And then you realize, well, like you kind of alluded to earlier, there's triggers that would happen, and then you would react to those triggers without really knowing where that came from, and that they really did go way back. It wasn't just because of what was going on at that time. Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's really good. And for him to be able to see that and to know, for both of you to get to where it wasn't as personal as you were taking it. And I think that's a huge step, because I think most of the time we take it personal. We certainly did a lot of that in the early years of marriage. My wife came from a very dysfunctional alcoholic family, and I didn't. And so we didn't know how to do anything right, especially fight. Our fights were horrible.
Yes.
Yeah. You just kind of, it's amazing. So if we know for sure that we do not want to repeat those family cycles, people that are listening, it's still hard to break them, right? Why?
Very hard. Yeah. I think part of it is the family blueprint that we come from, the experiences we've had, and the belief systems we've been raised with. and the thought patterns that we've developed as a result of everything we've heard growing up, all of that just forms this blueprint that we bring into marriage. And then we have all these expectations, and it's really hard to have a different outcome if we're not recognizing that blueprint and changing those little behaviors and those thoughts and everything that goes into it. I think unpacking expectations can be huge, because we just say, well, we want to have a healthy marriage. Let's have a great marriage. Let's be great parents. But there are so many things that go into that. And if we can't get on the same page about those little things, or at least be able to communicate about them and understand where the other person's coming from. And then I think the other thing is, when you've spent a really long time in an unhealthy family, it almost feels like a betrayal to do anything other than keep participating in that unhealthy family system. So, I feel like relationships, I like to think of them as this dance we're doing. And even if it's a really unhealthy dance, it's still the dance that we're used to doing together. And so now all of a sudden someone starts getting healthier and they change the dance steps, and you're like, whoa, I like that dance we were doing. I was used to that dance. And so it can be really hard to start doing a different dance with different steps and still communicate to our family, I love you and I want to honor you. And there are things that were done that didn't serve me well, and I'm going to do differently in my family, living in that tension.
Which is tension. Absolutely. Yeah. So when you said so many good things in that, but I love the analogy of the dance, because I think that's what it is. And we find ourselves doing it. It's so amazing how we repeat those cycles. And like you said, the betrayal, so you felt that too. Like, if I get out of this is what I'm supposed to do. This is my family of origin. This is what I grew up with, right?
Mm-hmm.
And now
and in my family, particularly, shame was a big factor. And so any suggestion that my mom or dad or my grandparents weren't doing something perfectly, or maybe it could be done differently, or maybe we shouldn't talk so poorly about other people, or maybe we should allow differing opinions in our family. Like, any suggestion of any of that was just seen as a betrayal and purposeful and hurtful. And obviously a lot of entanglement and enmeshment there. We were not having good recognition of independent people in a family system. But yeah, it can just be really hard and just uncomfortable, I think, and knowing you're going to face discomfort when you start doing new dance steps.
Yeah. If you look back over your family of origin from where you are now, were there red flags that you can look back and that they were there as you were at home, that, because I think other people might identify with some of those too.
Yeah, so many. And also, I like to give younger Kristen heaps of grace, because I think it can be easy to say, like, why didn't I know better? Why did I participate in that for so long? But you didn't know better because that's all you knew. Yeah. And when you grow up, you think this is how families function. This is normal. A lot of us are doing whatever is necessary to survive in whatever family system we're in. And so it can take growing up and starting to see how other families function. I know for me, it was in 7th grade, I would spend the night at a friend's house, and my family was not believers, but this family, the dad was a pastor, and I would go to church with him on Sunday, terribly confused about what I was hearing, but also seeing the love of Jesus in their home. Years later, when I wanted to finally break dysfunctional cycles in my 20s for the first time, I was like, okay, there was something different about her family, and they love Jesus. So maybe this Jesus thing is the key. And I brought myself to church. And so I think not knowing is a big part of why we don't escape. But those red flags are things like not respecting differing opinions. Your voice isn't heard or wanted. Shame is a big one. Control, when there is an overly controlling either person or people in the family. I think it can be really interesting to look at the different roles that we start to play when you've started to play the people pleaser or develop a hypervigilant state that you're assessing the mood of the room all the time. You know, what's going on here? Is this a good day or is this a bad day? And can I anticipate their moods and try to get ahead of it and anticipate their needs so that this doesn't unfold into be a really bad day? That kind of hypervigilance can be a really big red flag.